Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, your moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a really interesting webinar on tap today with some great speakers, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will be able to access it on demand. Following the webinar, we will be sending out an email that will contain a link to the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during our presentation today you have a question for either of our panelists, don't wait, don't hesitate, just use your GoToWebinar control panel, submit your question, and we'll take about 15 minutes or so near the end of the presentation and go through those questions. And finally, we do have 2 polling questions during today's presentation, so hopefully we'll get as many people involved in that as possible. Okay, with that, we're going to go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is DevOps for Customer Experience, Delivering Quality with Speed. Our speakers today are Amy Hudson, who is Global Head of Discovery and Enablement at Cyara, and Nicole Forsgren, Dr. Nicole Forsgren, well known, who is now Research and Strategy at Google. Welcome, ladies. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us. Happy to be here.
Great. Well, Amy, I know you're going to get things kicked off, so I'll put myself on mute and let you get to it.
Wonderful. Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I know it's right in the middle of the day for some of our East Coasters or getting up early out in the West Coast. So thank you for taking the time out to join us. Nicole and I will do our best not to disappoint. While people are still kind of joining here, why don't I just give kind of a high level on what we're planning to do today, an intro of myself, and we'll let Nicole give an intro as well. So the point of today's webinar today is it's really to discuss the intersection of DevOps and customer experience. We have found there's a lot here. It's a very meaty topic, and there's a lot to kind of gain for companies out there. More specifically within DevOps and CX, leveraging DevOps best practices to actually improve your customer experience quality and your ability to innovate on CX quickly and at high quality as well. So I'm looking forward to kind of chatting through with Nicole. We hope this feels like a fireside chat and pretty organic conversation just about the key points around the intersection of DevOps and CX. So I represent Cyara, and some of you out there likely have heard of us at this point. We're in the business of CX assurance, customer experience assurance. And what that means is we help companies ensure their customer experience is truly what they want it to be. And we enable our customers to innovate on that CX faster and at a higher quality. I've been with Cyara now a little over almost 3 years. I lead our discovery and enablement team. And essentially what we do is we work with Cyara's direct customers to come up with holistic solutions leveraging Cyara's product to help our customers meet their customer experience goals, whether it's an Agile or DevOps transformation, or whether it's driving as much automation throughout their SDLC as possible, or any kind of large transformation they may be going through. My team works with customers to help them come up with the right solution to meet their business and technical needs with Cyara. So that's a bit about my background and Cyara and why we're here today. Nicole, do you want to do an intro on yourself as well?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Forsgren. And my view on customer experience and software is it comes from a lot of my experience in the industry. So I started as a software engineer. I kind of moved into managing and maintaining my systems. I also have been the lead investigator on the largest studies in DevOps work to date. So I've run the State of DevOps report for the last 5 years. We've been working with large organizations and enterprise organizations for the last few years. I've worked with the company that was Dora, myself, Jez Humble, Gene Kim, and we've really been helping companies transform, understand what it means to deliver software with quality, with speed, safely, and security, so that we can really understand what it means to deliver value, quality, customer experience, so that we really can be an organization in today's world, right? Because when Mark Andreessen said years ago, software is eating the world, it was interesting because it really was prescient, right? Because the top 10 companies in the world back then, hardly any of them, I don't think any of them actually, really were using software to transform their companies. And now you look at all of those companies, every single one of them leverages software. And so we really need to understand what that means and how that integrates with the customer experience.
That's right. I love that. Every company is really a software company these days, and I think you highlighted that perfectly. All right. So should we kind of dig in here for
Yeah, I think so.
the? All right, let's do that. So we have 5 topics we want to hit with everybody today, and we're going to leave time at the end for questions, but certainly you can, I believe you can enter questions kind of in your console as we go. So certainly whatever comes to mind, don't hesitate. We'll make sure we get to it as best we can at the end. So the 5 topics we want to hit today, we want to talk about elite performers, and Nicole's done a lot of research on her end and can really dig into what that means and why and it's important. We're going to talk about the feedback loop. I'm sure you've heard this in multiple different ways, particularly in the context of DevOps, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the customer experience DevOps feedback loop. We're going to talk about the importance of measurement, and then of course culture, which I don't think should be an afterthought, and I think it often is. So we're going to spend some time on that. So those are our topics today. Looking forward to digging in, and why don't we kind of jump right into elite performers? Nicole, do you want to kick us off?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'd love to kick us off on this one. So when we talk about elite performers, right, I think the best way to think about this is to ask everyone where we think we are, right? Do we think that we are low performers, medium performers, high performers, or the highest performers? And then some people are like, what do you mean, Nicole? What do you mean by this? So when we think about specifically developing and delivering software, okay, where do we think we fall? And then some people are like, well, why does this matter? I'm not a software company. Again, right, as we were just talking about this, we talked about how software really kind of underlies almost every company and every business that's out there, regardless of the industry that we're in. So if we had to take a guess right now, where do we think we'll fall? I promise, Amy, I'm going to like give everybody some more info in a minute. Absolutely. So we'll have a better idea. But for now, I think this is kind of a good gut check.
I completely agree. We will share the definitions and kind of and some of the research around it. But I think everybody has a sense in their own mind what a low, medium, high, or elite performer is. So just using that sense of in my gut, where do I think my organization, my team lands on this? And then it'll be interesting to kind of map back based on what we talk through.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So we're seeing some of the data come in, and this is a fun little cheat because I get to watch it come in. This is interesting because so far it's looking like the data's falling along where the industry kind of falls. Okay, let's get a few more votes in. Come on, people. It's just a come with me now.
It's anonymous. We're not gonna call you out.
I don't even know. They don't even share it with me.
Exactly. We can't see.
I can't see. Okay. Are we ready to go? Let's close it.
All right, I'll close it out and I'll go. Do you want me to go ahead and show the responses as well?
Yeah,
the
let's
results?
share.
Okay. All right, sure.
We're all friends here. Everyone, we're friends.
We're all friends. So there are the poll results.
This is what we see. So of everyone who shared their experience in this webinar, 22% said they were likely low performers, 54% medium performers, 21% high performers, and 3% elite performers. Now, in the 2018 Accelerate State of DevOps report that DORP did this last year in collaboration with Google and several other sponsors across the industry. I want to say that our elite performers came out right around 7 or 8%. And our high performers were actually much larger this year. We hit right around like 30 or 40%, which is interesting because we see that group growing over time. So medium performers were a little smaller, and then low performers were a smaller group. I want to say they were in the teens, high teens. So that's an interesting gut check. Yeah. Now let's see what that actually means.
Okay.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. There
okay. Now ask ourselves, how well did we do? How well did we guess where we are? Now, to be that elite performer, that highest performing group. Now, I will note, elite performers are a subset of high performers, okay? We need to be deploying code, pushing code multiple times per day. We need to be able to push whenever we need to push. Now, some people are like, well, why would I ever do that? Let's find a situation, imagine a scenario where maybe there's a bug, maybe there's a security incident, maybe there's an emergency patch that needs to happen. We need to be able to push that button at any time. Okay, now lead time for changes. When we do commit code, we need to be able to go from code committed to code running in production in less than an hour. Now, some people are like, how is that possible? I have to be able to go through tests. When we leverage automation and mass parallelization, that can be possible. Now, what happens when things go down? Because no software is perfectly resilient. And some people say, but it has to be. No, we work in incredibly complex systems. Things will go down. And so we need to be prepared and armed and ready to deal with that. And by the way, that's what makes our systems better and stronger and incredibly robust. So when that does go down, how quickly can we restore service? Less than an hour. And what is our change fail rate? For the highest performers, it's between 0 and 15%. And when we dig into the data, it looks like it's actually closer to the 5% mark. Now, when we look at the high performance group, again, this falls around the 30 to 40% mark, which represents a growing group. So I will note that when we look at the data year over year over year, the industry is rapidly progressing. So this high performance group really is growing. This deployment frequency is between once per hour and once per day. How often does the organization deploy code? Now, as we look at lead time for changes, it's between once per day and once per week. What is the time to restore service when something goes down? How quickly can we restore? Time to restore is less than 1 day. If something goes down, we can recover in a day. Again, change fail rate between 0 and 15%. So this is the high performance group. This should be our goal. Now notice these kind of fall into categories. I'll take a step back quickly. Those top two are speed metrics. We can think about these in terms of speed or agility. The bottom two are going to be stability metrics, reliability metrics. Now, as we go on and we look at kind of our medium performers or our low performers, this represents a bit of a step down, right? Now, I will say, this isn't necessarily bad. It just means that we have more opportunities to improve, right? Now, another thing I will note, the data for the last 5 years in a row absolutely shows us that speed and stability go together. They move in tandem. There are no trade-offs. So we should not be mistaken and think that in order to be stable, in order to have a lower change fail rate, in order to have a better time to restore service, we should be slowing down. That doesn't happen. We actually see no evidence of it anywhere in the data. And why is this the case? If we think about it, it actually makes sense if we take a step back. Because what happens is, if we slow down, if we release code less frequently, what happens? What happens is we're releasing larger batches of code. We're reducing more change. More change is greater risk. It's larger surface area. It's a larger blast radius. it means we've introduced more change. It means it's even more difficult to debug those changes when they do introduce some kind of defect or incident. So it really does make more sense to introduce changes more often. They're much smaller. They have a much smaller blast radius. They're much easier to debug and understand what changes they've caused in our infrastructure. And I'm sure you've seen things like this happen in your own work, right, Amy?
That's right. I was actually just going to say, just jump in on this because I think, Nicole, the way you broke down the top two versus the bottom two metrics are deployment frequency and lead time, then time to restore and change failure rate. So let's take a CX lens to this. Let's take a customer experience lens to this. And just in my experience working with customers, with our customers, you look at deployment frequency and lead time for changes and you think, okay, that sounds very SDLC focused. Like what's the connection there with customer experience? Well, think about today how quickly companies need to innovate. Think about how quickly you need to make changes potentially to your customer experience based on either a bug out there or an experience change you need to make to stay competitive. Well, you better be able to deploy frequently. You better be able to reduce your lead time for changes to stay relevant. And then you look at the bottom metrics around time to restore and change failure rate. Well, these are your direct contact metrics with your end customers, right? Time to restore service. If you've got something out there where service is down and you've got calls dropping in your IVR or your chatbot is not up and running and your customers trying to use it, well, that's time down. That's revenue lost. That's customer experience damaged, and minimizing that time to restore it's mission critical, right? And your change failure rate. How regularly you're introducing something to your production environment potentially that your customers are bumping into that is a failure and that it's either a bug or it's not as the design that you wanted it to be. Well, your customers are going to experience that head on. And so the focus on really trying to be a high or elite performer in these areas is really the kind of goals that you would want as you think about being a CX innovator as well. And so I really like this breakdown because not only it shows the right areas of focus, but the progress that our companies can make along the journey of getting to high performer or even elite performer, if you will.
Absolutely. So maybe let's take another view into this, right? So what's the difference here between elite and low performers, right? What does this really look like? So what it looks like is when we compare our highest performers and our lowest performers, elite performers see 46 times more frequent code deployments and over 2,500 times faster lead time from code commit to code deploy. And then some people say, okay, but what's the benefit of moving faster? Why do I care about moving faster? That's what allows you to pivot when you need to pivot. That's what allows you to keep up with compliance and regulatory changes. That's what allows you to react to customer needs when you need to react to customer needs. Now, when we look at the stability metrics, we see 7 times lower change fail rate. That's significant. And over 2,600 times faster time to recover from incidents. Again, that's so significant because when something does go down, Amy just mentioned that you don't want to have a slow recovery time. I think I heard someone say once, slow is the new down. Customers don't appreciate and don't respond or react well to slow service.
You have got to keep up. I completely
agree. Exactly.
Yep. Well, I think that's really, I think one thing, and we probably don't need to retake the poll, but I would just kind of encourage the audience to look at your score that your poll answer you gave kind of based on that definition now that and go back, are you in a medium performer? Are you low? Or are you medium or high? Do we have more elite performers than we know out there? Probably interesting time to kind of reflect based on that.
And I think another thing that this really allows us, particularly the speed aspect that I think is so important, is feedback. And I think in particular, customers and the customer experience piece gives us insights that are so valuable, right? And I think that's really the part that makes me most excited when we think about, some people say DevOps, but DevOps and software and anything else. And sometimes that's the part that almost gets lost in some of these discussions. And I think you have some of the best insights and stories around this.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I completely agree with you. This feedback loop concept, you hear it in different degrees in terms of DevOps. But yeah, let's shift into this discussion because it's quite related to the elite performer discussion as well. It's kind of like a double click into that. So good visual here, and I'll talk you through that. Before I do, I think where I kind of started thinking about this feedback loop concept is in the customer experience industry, the CX industry, there is a heavy focus these days on CX strategy. What is the customer journey? What's the optimal channel usage given that we're omni-channel, multi-channel these days? How do we design the best customer experience? There's a heavy focus on that strategy these days. In my opinion, there is not enough focus on what is that real-time actual customer experience that's happening in the moment for your end customers, or what we at Cyara call the operational customer experience. What is actually happening in the moment? So as we look at this feedback loop, you can kind of see, you can really enter the feedback loop at any point, right? But maybe a low performer or a company that is not really viewing their SDLC and DevOps from a customer experience perspective, they may look at the feedback loop in a sort of different way, a more traditional way, which is, okay, production monitoring is up and running, and we get an alert and a server is almost at capacity, right? So, or it's over capacity. So fire drill, server's down. But we don't really know oftentimes what the customer experience is for those kinds of alerts, right? So you're kind of guessing based on a hardware meter, if you will, a hardware reading what the customer experience is. And then eventually you kind of firefight and you maybe find a bug, and then you kind of push it through the system and get to production in the next release. Well, taking a different lens, taking the CX, the operational CX lens to this feedback loop, how I see it in an optimal way is in production, rather than just monitoring your hardware out there, you have something out there that is monitoring what the customer is actually experiencing in the moment, not the capacity of the server in the back office, but is the customer experiencing delays in their prompting or time to connect? Is the customer experiencing the correct prompts? Is the customer even able to connect when it comes to chat? Is somebody answering their chats? How long is it taking to get to those chats? Or if you're running several phone numbers, if customers can call in over across multiple phone numbers, what are those real live stats of your IVR in that moment? So if you're able to then capture, use this example, hey, there's a delay of 2 minutes to connect customers. So if you're able to capture that real time immediately in the moment, then you can quickly pass that information back to either your design or your plan team to adjust it, whether it's a bug or a feature at that point. Fold it into the design and then pump it through to the build guys, right? And then you can ideally automatically generate your testing scripts from your design, right? And run the test automatically. And using kind of DevOps automation throughout, run your deploys automatically and get that change or fix through to operations, through to your monitoring quickly, and kind of run that feedback loop again. So essentially what you're trying to do, capture real live information using customer experience monitoring, not hardware monitoring, pass that feedback through to your design build guys, drive automated testing and deployments and kind of anything through that DevOps train that you can automate, do that. So change quickly gets back in production, and you run that feedback loop constantly. You should always be monitoring in production from a CX perspective. And then if you're releasing, as Nicole said, if you're releasing with that kind of frequency, then you could be innovating, bug fixing, whatever you do to improve your customer experience, pushing that through regularly as well. So this sort of infinity kind of figure eight loop, you can kind of track it, right, from gathering information and monitoring, kicking that back to the design build team, flying it through the release into production again, and keep looping back and forth. So in my opinion, the ability to run through this loop quickly, smoothly, with as much automation as possible is how you make those strides to be that high performer, that elite performer that Nicole was talking about. And Nicole, I don't know if this, this resonates with you, as this is my view from meeting with customers who have not gotten here and customers who are starting to get there. This to me is that kind of ideal view, that happy path, if we can get there, of what taking production data looks like and making something of that feedback.
Oh, absolutely. It's so nice because that's what allows us, again, to pivot when we need to pivot, address customer concerns, act on them quickly. It's really what enables us to deliver value, right?
Well,
and
exactly.
It's really exciting to be able to see companies move along that transformation path. And it doesn't just make organizations more valuable, right? It also makes engineers happy, right? We see happy engineers. It decreases deployment pain. It adds, more engagement to their work. It's really fantastic to see all of this happen as organizations go through this work and this transformation.
I think it's spot on. I think it's easy for us in the technology field who kind of grew up here to take the technology lens, like take the hardware lens, take kind of the traditional waterfall approach. It's easy to fall back into that mode. But really, if you apply the customer experience lens through the whole process, I find it ends up being your anchor, if you will. Any time you face a decision point, if you anchor back to what the customer experience is, what you want it to be, and make that the priority throughout this feedback loop, I think that's how I see customers really be kind of elite performers and really drive for that innovative customer experience. One thing that's probably worth digging into a little bit further is if we think about this, elite performers, DevOps, a feedback loop, how we actually measure that, right? What are the kind of measurements we can use throughout these transformations? I think is a really important thing to kind of double click into. There's a lot of different measurements that I think get kicked around, but Nicole, I think you have a really great perspective on this. So I'm hoping you can kind of share with the group some of your thoughts on measurements, and I can absolutely chime in as well.
Sure. Yeah, this might be worth a quick side note, right? This is one of the biggest questions I get is, as we go along this journey and as we, talk about these feedback loops, how do we know if we're moving in the right direction? What measures, what types of metrics should I collect? What's the one metric that counts? What are the top 10 measures we should collect, Nicole? Well, sorry, everyone, there's no one metric that matters. There's just not. There's no top 10 measures that count. However, there are definitely some guidelines that we can always talk about, right? So let's kind of go through these quickly, and then you can always sort of keep these in mind. And I say there's no one metric that matters, or there's no top 10. And this is true because every organization will have its own context that matters. And with these guidelines in place, you can kind of like massage the metrics that fit for your context. So here are the things to keep in mind. First, outputs are not great, right? What we want to do is think about things like outcomes. Now, what do we mean by this? If we think about lines of code is an output, right? We don't want to reward someone for developing a bloated solution that has thousands and thousands of lines of code, because all that does is contribute to technical debt that's difficult to maintain. What we want is an outcome. Also, what ends up happening is you could inadvertently end up rewarding people who focus on local solutions over global solutions. So as an example, we focus on, so we just talked about elite performers, low performers, that focused on throughput, code commit to code running in production, and stability. That's something that requires developers, testers, QA, operations professionals. That requires an entire team, an entire group working together on something that benefits the entire organization. Again, that's an outcome. That's not an output, right? So we want to make sure that we're not focusing on an output and not an outcome. Now, conversely, sometimes people will say, well, let's just minimize lines of code. But then you might end up with something that's so clever, and you achieve something in one line of code that later no one can actually understand it. So again, outcomes, not just outputs. Now, next, remember that capacity is not productivity. Sometimes people really want to measure productivity of their teams, and so they will think about things like capacity. And they'll look to things like story points. Now, for people who are not familiar, story points are a capacity planning tool. So what we'll do is we'll get teams together, we'll have them estimate how many story points they can do. They'll break down tasks and they will estimate the level of work that they can achieve into epics, into story points. Well, what happens is each team is working in a unique context, right? And they will estimate how much work they can do, and this work is based on what they call story points. What happens is, first of all, many times teams will then be compared to other teams, which first of all is not appropriate, because one team working on one technology in one context should not be compared to another team working on a different technology in another context. Separately, if a team has estimated their capacity and then they are told that this is going to be used to measure their productivity, they will then understandably game the system, right? They will start to overestimate or underestimate in order to hit their targets or meet their targets. And some people are like, well, yeah, of course, right? That's what's going to happen. Here's the larger concern. If that's how they are always going to be judged, what happens when you have unintended consequences? If the real goal is an overall outcome, what happens when we need two teams to collaborate together? I am not likely to collaborate with, say, Amy, when it will take away from me achieving my own story points, even though we know the overall goal is to create and collaborate on something together. Again, we need to think about an overall global goal. Now, finally, utilization. We need to remember 100% utilization isn't the goal. And if anything, we can point to math for this. As utilization reaches 100%, lead times approach infinity. Now, if anything, we can look at our own to-do lists to think about this, right? As our days reach 100%, anytime something unexpected hits our plates, we can never get anything done. Now, we can also just look back at what Amy just talked about with feedback loops. We want feedback and we want to get it quickly, because if a bug comes back or a test comes back that wasn't passed, if I'm working on a task and I find out that something didn't work, if I find out about that within 10 or 15 minutes, it's still in my head. I know what to fix. I know what I was doing. That's a perfect scenario. I want to build in buffer time to fix unexpected things. Mm-hmm. However, if I don't find out about some test not passing for weeks or months, which, by the way, is very often the case in old monolithic systems, I have to take a significant amount of time to dig back into the code, to put my head back in that space, to find out what was even happening. It takes a significant amount of work. And if I've booked out my day completely full, I'll never get anything done. So again, 100% utilization is not the goal. We don't want to book ourselves and our teams and our people completely full. So again, global outcomes where the teams work together. That's what we should be thinking about when we design our measures.
And one thing, if you wouldn't mind me just popping in here for a minute, I think the utilization point, I just love, whether it's your a technical coder or something, or whether it's just your personal life, right? That 100% utilization, it just feeds chaos, right? It's just, I think it's a great point. But more importantly, your holistic point about the goal, having a goal, measurement, and making sure you're measured against that. The only other thing I'll add on from my experience, what we've seen with customers, is making sure that this goal, right, the thing, every change is happening for a reason, right? Particularly improvements are almost always tied to some kind of business goal. Making sure that those metrics and measurements that the businesses drive to improve, making sure those are shared with the technical side of the house as well. Making sure everybody involved in your SDLC throughout kind of your DevOps lifecycle and your monitoring, make sure everybody knows what goal you're trying to accomplish here. It, to the point you made earlier, Nicole, it can be a wonderful motivator. Research has shown that sharing outside just kind of like the story you're working on or the technical requirement, but sharing the business goal you're trying to achieve can absolutely be a motivator to those driving the change through. But also can result in much more creative problem solving, much more innovative thinking, leveraging really smart people on the technical side of the house, using those brains to help solve complicated problems. That comes from kind of sharing the broader goal and the broader measurement that's at play here. So that would be just kind of one thing I've seen out there.
Mm-hmm. And we see that show up in the data all over the place, right? So we see it lead to superior solutions. We see it show up in a decrease in unintended consequences. We see it show up in more engaged and happier engineers and technical staff throughout. It has so many fantastic benefits. I'm so glad you brought that up.
That's awesome. That's great. So we had, and then there was some data you wanted to share too around manual work. We should talk about that quickly too.
Sure. So as we think about what else happens as we start going into all of this work that we have to do, right? Because we are working in increasingly complex systems. There's this interesting thing that happens, right? So we start automating the work, we start picking off the low-hanging fruit, and there's this really interesting phenomenon that happens. Let's take a look at this really quickly. Our elite performers are doing fantastically well, right? They have the lowest levels of manual work that we have to do, because as we start a new process, right? Let's walk through this, right? So Amy, I'm sure you've seen this. As we start doing something new, we always do it manually, right? The first time you start doing something, we do it manually, and then we automate it, hopefully, right? Hopefully we do it, like we automate it. We see this really interesting thing though. So take a look at our low performers. 30% of their configuration management tasks are done manually. 30% of testing is done manually. 30% of deployments are done manually. 40% of the change approval process is done manually. Now we move on to our medium performers. And look what happens. Testing jumps up. Change approvals jump up. How is this possible? So many people come to me and they're like, Nicole, you did your stats wrong. There's a mistake. And I'm like, actually, thank you. Actually, no. Although, like the first time we did this, we were like, what? This has shown up several years now. And here's what happens. We made a picture because pictures are helpful. What happens is, as we start on this journey, we have quick wins. Things get better, but then things get a little bit worse, because what happens is we've started to automate so many things, and we've started making more. We make more software, we make more things. More software also means more testing. So we suddenly have a really hard time keeping up with the amount of tests we have to do, the amount of change approvals we have to do. So many times companies then start inserting more process to try to keep up. there's more technical debt. There's just more stuff we have to keep up with. And sometimes I work with companies and they're like, okay, that like I just want to go back, undo everything. I'll go back to being a low performer. It's fine. I was like, it was easier before. Just go back. And we're like, no, just keep going.
Push through. Yep.
Push through. Relentless improvement. Right. That's what they call it in the continuous improvement paradigm. Relentless improvement. Because what happens is you've actually uncovered the real problems. I joke it's almost like going to the gym, right? Like the first time you go, you're fine, and 2 days later, like you just hurt. But what happens is you need to keep moving to like work out that lactic acid, right? Like keep your muscles moving, because you're training, you're building new muscles, you're burning new technical, you're finding new technical muscles. And what happens, things get better, and we see it so often. And I'm sure you've seen something similar. You discover pain points that you actually didn't know were there. They were just hidden, but trust me, they were there.
Yeah, they're those unused muscles, right? That you've found.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, I was actually speaking with one of our customers a few months ago, and this was a similar thing. I mean, it happens with our customers who specifically our solutions focus around testing. So just using the testing row that you had mentioned before, but it is common for our customers. You jump in, our solution's pretty easy to use straight away. So you can really start automating right away, but then you get to the more complicated things, right? It is common to you grab the low hanging fruit, but then you push through, you face the more complicated things. Happens with our solution, but even more complicated than just leveraging our technology is going through a large transformation, right? That Nicole's describing here. There is always this kind of ditch you fall into, right? You come in, you start working on it, things are going well, but then the going gets tough for a while. And I was speaking with one of our customers previously, and they said, you know what? If there's one piece of advice I could give to other people starting off on either DevOps or Agile transformation of this way would be, it is going to get really, really hard at certain points, and it's going to feel like crap at certain points, but you've just got to push through continually, to your point, relentless improvement, just knowing that you're doing the right thing and you're going to get through this ditch was very, very helpful for him. And that was the one thing he's saying, if I could pass on to anybody, just that you've got the right goals in mind, you're marching in the right direction. It's going to get crappy, but you do get through it.
And then once you do, everything is so much easier, because then it's automated. So it's consistent, it's reliable, it's auditable, it's secure, it's safe, and it's boring. And boring in the best way, because the things that used to be done manually just happen. They're just there. And you've freed up the headspace of your engineers and your customer service experts to do interesting, fun new work. Now, instead of the work of automating and firefighting, you're doing the new work of discovery.
Yeah, and you're focused on value-added work.
Right, and you've learned from all of the things you did before, so you don't make those same mistakes again. So it really is this wonderful learning and growing and building process. So I don't want to make it sound like this is awful and like it's just a grind. I mean, it's grind, but it's this wonderful, wonderful thing. And the great thing about automation is now it's codified. Like it doesn't undo. Like you continue maintaining it, but it's there. And it's also the wonderful thing about code is it's also a form of documentation. You can see where you've learned from it. And when like you have an escape or a defect or something, you can also see where you missed those pieces.
Absolutely.
It's really quite lovely.
Your point is spot on too. It's like it is a grind that you need to push through, but you do it for a reason, right? The end result is it's satisfying. There's a lift. There's so much relief. You're focused on value added work and not kind of the mundane kind of treading water work, if you will.
Mm-hmm. And I love that you mentioned that, because if you don't go through it, then you are forever focused on the mundane treading water work, and that's fine. Like that's a choice. You can make that choice. But if you don't do that, then you are forever focused on the mundane treading water work, and that doesn't scale. People don't scale that way. So that's a choice, but that's a hard choice. That's a choice, but that's rough.
So I'm looking at our time here and knowing that we can chat forever. I'm wondering if we should. I absolutely want to get to the culture section. There's a good poll around that one. So maybe we should. Maybe why don't I hit repeatable? I think we're going to talk about testing patterns next. Why don't we go through that just really, really quickly,
Real
and then
quick.
I don't want to skimp on culture because that's the whole point I made at the beginning. Um, I'll talk about repeating testing patterns quickly from my perspective. I think just the quick takeaway here is essentially in order to really drive quality and solid automation throughout your testing, you should really look to find kind of repeatable things where you can. And specifically from a Cyara perspective, there's no reason. One thing we really drive for is kind of a shared library, a library that can be used in multiple different environments, pre-production and prod, your kind of dev sandbox environments, something you can leverage across multiple different environments. So you're not recreating the wheel. And if you want to change it, then you can make that change all the way through. You make one change and it changes for all your different phases and your different environments that need testing. And one of the most important things, in my opinion, about this is with manual testing, this kind of consistency through your testing. You don't have it if it's a person doing it or if it's different people doing it. You don't have consistent, repeatable patterns that not only save time, but they drive that consistency and quality within. And so one thing that Cyara really focuses on, and one thing we work with customers on, is leveraging your library across all the different tests you need to do, so you're not recreating it at every phase. And if you need to tweak things based on design changes or fixes that might come through, that test can automatically push through. So again, we're just minimizing the manual work behind this kind of stuff. We want you guys to be able to push a button and automate as much as you possibly can through your process. So that's my very quick abridged version on repeatable testing. Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add on that before we jump on?
Yeah, that was great.
Yeah, okay, good. And just for you folks out there, any other questions on this kind of stuff, you can reach out to us. We'll make sure to drill in deeper. So
okay, I'm going to go ahead and throw out this next poll here for you guys real quick.
Let's talk culture.
Yes.
We're going to do this to you again. We're going to make you kind of
make you guess.
Make you guess, use your gut. What kind of culture do you think you work in?
Okay, but I will give you an also known as. Pathological is also known as a power-based culture. Bureaucratic is a rule-based culture. And generative is a performance-based culture. So where does everyone think that they fall? Where does your team, what is your team focused on?
To see that, I love watching the numbers move.
Rules or performance?
And Nicole, after you gave the kind of a sneak peek definition, or a little definition of it, I saw the numbers switch, bounce around a little bit. So this is fun to watch.
Yeah, it's funny. Every once in a while, people are like, pathological isn't fair. And I'm like, listen, this comes from, by the way, it comes from a sociologist named Ron Westrom. I didn't name it pathological. But it is very power-based. Okay, I think
right.
we're good.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and close the poll now and share the results so everybody can see them. There you go, guys.
All right.
Okay, so this is interesting. So we tend to see bureaucratic pull in about 55%. Generative usually pulls in about 25 to 30%, with the rest falling into pathological or power-based. Okay, so what does this mean? What does this look like? So when we're looking at DevOps type organizations,
You want me to hide these? Sorry.
Sure. The organizational culture that is important to think about is one in which we talk about these types of characteristics. Now, again, it was defined by Ron Westrom, and it is predictive of outcomes. So we've studied this in our research quite often. So again, power-oriented, low cooperation. You shoot the messenger. I'm sure people have heard that before. responsibilities are shirked, bridging's discouraged, right? So we don't talk about breaking down silos here. Failure leads to scapegoating, and novelty is crushed, right? Like, you don't come up with a new idea, we don't do that here. Now, bureaucratic or rule-oriented cultures. Now, again, this isn't necessarily bad, right? This was created with very good things in mind, in terms of, like, the rule applies equally to everyone. It was created with the best intentions in mind. We have some cooperation. We ignore people who bring us bad news because I don't want to hear it. I get that some days. Very narrowly defined responsibilities. Bridging is tolerated. Failure leads to justice. We see this quite often in certain types of organizations. Novelty leads to problems, right? Again, because it's just, when you have very narrowly defined responsibilities, brand new thinking outside the box things just don't have a good fit there. We don't know how to deal with it at those types of organizations. Now, a generative performance-oriented culture, this is very highly correlated with elite performers, by the way. And it does happen to be predictive of both software delivery performance and organizational performance. And it's predictive of performance outcomes in several different types of organizations, not just technology. This is typified by high cooperation among teams. The messenger is trained. Now, sometimes people ask, what do you mean messenger is trained? It means the messenger is trained to bring us bad news so that we understand what's happening. We surface problems so that we can fix them. Risks are shared. Again, so when I said earlier that we want to have global outcomes, risks are shared because when the team fails, everyone fails, right? What's important is that the organization does well. Bridging is encouraged, right? So in DevOps, when we talk about breaking down silos, this is it. Failure leads to inquiry. So if anyone has heard of blameless postmortems or learning reviews or retrospectives, this is something that is very, very similar. And then also novelty is implemented. So in these types of organizations, we're very interested in things like looking for out-of-the-box thinking or really interesting new types of things that we can look for solutions for. And I'm sure you've seen things like this in your work, Amy.
I have, and I think we can talk about the nuances and little tricks of an automation from a DevOps transformation, but really, if you don't get the culture right, it's not going to work, right? The culture is so important in making these kinds of transformations. It is, I would put it as number one, and I work for an automation solution company, right? Culture is so important, and having that continuous improvement, relentless improvement focus is just spot on. But the thing, we are running short on time, so why don't we try to wind things down and move things open to questions. The closing point that I would make before we jump into a couple questions is really everything we talk through, the entire reason why we have this conversation about DevOps and CX interacting, and we're striving to move things faster and higher quality. It is all for the customer experience in the end. That's our why. That's Nicole's why, right? Like, it is all about trying to make your customers' interactions with your organization smoother, more fruitful, and more productive. And that's really, you can draw a direct line from any of the topics we hit to customer experience. And that's really kind of the whole purpose of taking this lens to it.
Okay, should we go ahead and jump into a couple questions before we get to the top of the hour?
Cover these.
All right, great. So let's jump right on in then. Our customer experience covers a long route through our systems. It starts with a customer going to our help pages, so starting a chat or a phone call, dealing with a support agent who is using our tools to solve that customer's problem. To make sure that experience is positive means the focus can't be on one component of the experience, but on the full end-to-end experience. Turning a change around in an hour in that environment is not an easy task. So would you have any thoughts on operating in that kind of environment?
It's a great question. I love it. So that's from Steve Harris out there. And so, and I can take the Cyara CX lens, and then Nicole, I'll let you kind of jump in when it comes to kind of the turning the change around, et cetera. So from a customer experience perspective, you absolutely, from Cyara's perspective, that kind of journey, right, that's crossing multiple different channels, hitting down to the agent level, and who's, as you said, using tools to solve that customer's problem. You need to kind of take that holistic journey into account as you think about your testing, and you're making sure that that is the actual experience they're seeing in production. And so from Cyara's perspective, we would absolutely have to look at the entire journey that the customer is on. We take a outside in view of our kind of automation, our automatic testing. And so we would synthetically mimic that journey through your production and your pre-production environments, and then report back on the actual experience, whether it's in your test environment or in your production environment. And so we take a holistic, I like this question because it's easy for me to articulate that Cyara's kind of holistic end-to-end approach to how we think about automatic testing, right? Automated testing is from that end-to-end customer journey, zipping across channels. We expect that these days, right? Every customer environment is going to hop channels the more things go. And so that's the lens that we take. And so I think this journey is kind of aligns to how we do that kind of outside in omni-channel journey testing as well. Nicole, I don't know if you have anything to add on to it.
No, that's good.
All right, great. So next question then, I think we have time for one more. This is all somewhat high level. Do you have any data points about teams doing DevOps pipelines on commercial software?
I can take that one. I'm not sure what you mean by data points. There are several companies in commercial software doing DevOps pipelines and doing it quite successfully. So it looks like, and I'll say that there are companies in all industries, in all verticals of all sizes, doing DevOps at high performance levels, right? And so what that ends up looking like is iterating, doing a little bit better, iterating, transforming, focusing on things like technology, automation, process, culture across all of their teams. They tend to start at like 1 or 2 pilot projects and then kind of grow out from there.
Okay, great. So I think we have time for maybe one very quick question and then we'll close it out. Let's see, Cheryl asked, can you discuss size of the company when it comes to DevOps maturity? I'm in a medium-sized company and I often hear we're too small for that. It seems like smaller should be more nimble. I would think you'd be right, Cheryl.
I'm happy to jump in on that one as well, and then Amy, you can follow up if you want.
Sure.
So I've got over 30,000 data points around the world across all industries. I think I touched on this a tiny bit. So in some ways, I guess you could say smaller is more nimble, but at the same time, you could also say that larger companies will have more resources to dedicate, right? And so what we actually see is that there is no statistically significant difference between small, medium, or large. There's also no statistically significant difference between industry type. And what I mean by that is we see highly regulated fields in elite performers. We even see startups in low performers, right? You can make common mistakes and be a startup and end up building a giant monolith that makes it really, really difficult to make nimble software. You can also be a highly regulated company. Sometimes people say, well, I can't be Amazon. They're just a unicorn. Amazon has also been known to process the occasional credit card transaction, right? They are subject to PCI DSS, right? So we see all types of organizations along all areas of the spectrum.
Yeah, I would echo that too. A lot of our customers are quite large, so I probably have more experience with the larger ones. But to your point, Nicole, larger companies have the resources to have, an entire DevOps enablement team and bring in coaches and trainers and whatever. And so they do have that on their side. At the same time, though, from a small or medium-sized organization, you don't have to shift 500, 1,000 people. You can work and collaborate in smaller groups. And so I do think there's pros and cons to both. And they're, in my opinion and experience, the too small for that argument, certainly not necessarily true in all cases. And I think you could certainly implement this at a medium-sized company. Absolutely.
All right, great. I guess a lot of it still really does have to do with culture there. Okay, unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for the question and answer period. So I do want to thank everybody who did submit questions. And please know that if we did not get to your question, I'm very sorry, but the folks at Cyara will be getting a copy of all the questions. So hopefully somebody from the organization will be more than happy to reach out to you offline and get your question answered. Also, yeah, okay, great. So also want to remind the audience that today's event has been recorded. So if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to listen to it again, you will have the opportunity to do so. We'll be sending out an email very soon that includes a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be on the DevOps.com website, so you can always find it there under the webinars section. Just go to the on-demand part, and it should be right there waiting for you. While you're there, check out the other webinars that we have, both upcoming and on demand. Hopefully there'll be something there that interests you. So it just leaves me to say thank you to Amy Hudson and to Nicole Forsgren for giving such a great presentation. Thanks, girls, ladies, you did great. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having us. It was fun.
All right. Great,
thank you, everyone,
great.
for joining. Appreciate it.
Yes, thank you to the audience for joining us today. And this is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody.